Hey writers, it's Megan in All Writers Welcome, and I wanted to chat today about outlining, and the topic specifically is outlining. It's personal. So, if you're interested in outlining, if you want to ask questions or share your process, we'd love to hear from you. And if you have other questions that you would like me to tackle in a future live, in an upcoming live, I also welcome you to put those questions into the comments. So outlining, it's the dreaded the dreaded thing for a lot of writers. So here's my goal for today. I want to give you my feeling, like a general overview about outlining that is a mindset. I'm borrowing a page from Ella here. I want to walk you through a mindset that you could have toward outlining that I think would be really effective. And then I'm going to give you a couple examples that will help you start to gain insight into what kind of outlining might be helpful for you. So let me start by defining an outline. An outline is anything that you can write from and get to where you want to go. Ooh, that's very freeing. That means your outline does not have to look a particular way. It doesn't have to match what somebody else's outline looks like. Hey, how's it going, Lloyd? Outlining, dot, dot, dot. Yes, exactly, right? Um, so I think this is the first powerful thing that you can start believing as writers. My outline is whatever I need to be able to write. And that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Okay, so that's the overarching thought. Now here are some kind of step-by-step ways to think about how you could find an outlining process that works for you. The number one thing to know is that all of our brains are different. There are, by some counts, 12 different intelligences, and then, by some counts, even more. And that means that we all process information differently and we remember it, or things make sense to us in different ways. Oh, hey, Shauna, good. I'm glad you're here. That's why I just went into our private All Writers Welcome Academy Facebook page and was like, you guys, I'm talking about outlining because I thought some of you might be interested. All right, so I know that I am a kinesthetic thinker, and that just means I think my best when I am moving. So the outline I'm actually working from today is something I copied into a notebook. You can see my terrible chicken scratch from my whiteboard. Because for me, the bigger motion of writing like this sends my brain into high gear. I'm a person who does walking and thinking. I take my voice recorder, I walk around my neighborhood, and I talk out loud to myself. And that is something I know jogs my brain. So that's only one example. If you think you're best by moving, translate your outlining process into something you can do with big motions. Get yourself a whiteboard, get big pieces of poster paper, and put things on there. You might be a linear thinker where you really want to see the sequenced order of one thing goes to the next. You might be a visual thinker and it's helpful to you to use cartooning or storyboarding or visual representations. There are so many different ways you can plan. And when you start experimenting and figuring out what your thinking style is and what's friendliest for your brain, it's going to be an entirely different experience. Ooh, you play games like backgammon. That sounds really fun. So Shauna, I'd be curious, can you say a little bit more about how playing a game, like playing a board game, helps your thinking? What do you find, it just wakes up your brain? That's intriguing. I like that idea of playing and using that to wake up your creativity. But I think a lot of the discomfort of outlining comes from us not using a process that works for our brains, and in some cases not even realizing that's an option, or that that's something we can do. Outlining doesn't have to feel uncomfortable. It's not better for you if it feels uncomfortable. It's not like taking your vitamins or eating your vegetables. It's really whatever you need to be able to plan. That's intriguing. So Shauna's saying it takes no concentration to play. So this is kind of like having music on in the background. Some people do their best thinking if there is enough of a distraction to drown out the thoughts that compete for the attention of what you're really trying to do. So having something low level going on for your brain to tie up all those little parts of your brain that are like, oh, you forgot this and think about this other thing. If you are somebody who has a million thoughts going through her brain all the time, yeah, music or some activity that doesn't require a lot of thought can be really helpful. And oh, I love this. Paige says, I act out the scenes I need to do next by myself, pretending I'm different characters so I can get what I need. That is brilliant, Paige. I love that. That is fantastic. Is that something that's helpful for you? It sounds like it is such a great release and way to get those ideas out. Okay, so those are so many, oh gosh, there's so many different ways we think and so many creative ways that you can start planning out your thoughts, right? Because remember, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get a plan that we can write from. So the first point was keeping in mind that we all think differently, and that if you can hone in on what your unique thinking style is, it's going to be incredibly helpful. The second point is to be flexible. Sometimes you're going to need more planning, sometimes you're going to need less, and that might depend on the type of writing you're doing. It might depend on your headspace, what else is going on in your life. It might depend on the length of the section you're writing. It might depend on how much you know. We sometimes see people have questions in the group like, I'm writing a fight scene or I'm writing a sex scene. How do I do that? There might be some scenes you approach and you go, I just know there's a lot that has to go on here to make this seem realistic, and it's a little bit more challenging. So be flexible. Maybe those are the places where you need more planning so that you feel comfortable. All right, the third point when you're outlining is to ask how far in advance it feels good to you to plan. And you know, there's a funny thing that happens when we talk to other people about their craft. We can sometimes assume that the way other people are doing it is right and the way we're doing it is wrong, when really the way person A is doing it is right for person A, and the way person B is doing it is right for person B. So don't make the mistaken assumption that the right way to do it is the way somebody else is doing it. Again, the right way to outline is the way that allows you to write and get down what you want. So ask that, how far in advance does it feel good to plan? Now, this is a really personal question. And again, it might depend on what you're writing and the kind of writing you're doing. But some people feel really anxious if they don't plan all the way to the end. And some people feel really anxious if they plan so far in advance that they feel limited and rigid. Now, knowing where you fall, and then there's a whole spectrum between, how much feels good to me. And you might get some clues to this in other parts of your life, although there's no guarantee it's the same for writing as other parts. But maybe just start this research question, pose it to yourself. Do I like to do all of my grocery shopping on one day of the week because I've done all my meal planning for the week? Or on a daily basis, do I like to think, what do I feel like eating today? And go, or is it in between every few days? Start doing this research. Find out how far in advance to plan feels comfortable for you. The fourth point, the fourth question to ask yourself is, how deep does it feel good to me to plan? Do I want just a rough sketch? Like, I generally know what's going to happen and then I'm good. Do I want to plan chapter by chapter? Do I want to plan scene by scene? Do I want to plan moment by moment? There's no right answer to that. It's what feels good to you. So you can, again, try to check in with other places in your life and see if those shed light on what kind of planner you are. But the fifth point and the point that really ties these all together is that what you need to do when it comes to outlining is experiment. You need to try different types of outlines. You need to try different lengths of outlining, how far in advance you're planning. You need to try different depths of planning. Are you just getting a rough sketch of the scene, or are you really going moment by moment? Here's what's going to happen. And you need to keep track of what works for you. And there's no guarantee that what works for you on Monday will also work for you on Wednesday. We all have ebbs and flows of energy. And again, if there's a scene that's more challenging, maybe when you go to write that fight scene, you'll find it feels more comfortable to have every move planned out. And then when you write the conversation in the coffee shop, you feel like, oh, I know I want them to talk about baseball and then get into a fight about money, done and done. you may have to adjust. But when you experiment, when you try different ways of outlining, and then when you track what works, and when you respect the messages your brain is sending you about, what's hard and what's easy, and put those into the mix, then outlining becomes something that is actually helpful to your writing. And that's the point of this. There's, the age-old controversy, are you a planner or a pantser? And I really have a hard time thinking that it's one or the other. I really have a hard time thinking it's binary. I think, as with most things in life, there's a spectrum. And there are, yes, people who love to have every detail planned, and there are people who are like, I kind of basically know the way my story's going to go, and they start in. And then there's everything in between. So you don't have to choose a side. You don't have to come out for one camp or the other. You can love outlining certain types of scenes and then feel like you don't have to outline other types of scenes. It's a really, again, the definition of an outline for me is something you can write from that allows you to get where you're going. So whatever that looks like for you. All right, I'm going to go through and grab some of the questions that I may have missed along the way. Mike says strategic thinking and thinking multiple steps ahead. So that feels comfortable for you. And Mike, get back in and tell us how you do that. What process do you use for thinking several steps ahead? I really love this term you've used, strategic thinking. That's a great way to be with outlining, because if you think strategically, or if you focus on that, it reminds you that the outline is not the point. The outline is something that gets you to your goal of completing your story or whatever kind of writing you're doing. So if you have in mind, oh, I'm using strategic thinking, then it's just whatever it takes to achieve that goal. Joanne asks, do you need to have an outline? Well, yes, when the definition of an outline is some kind of plan that lets you write and helps you get where you're going. And for some people, their outline might be a couple of words scribbled on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. That is an outline if that's a plan that gets that writer to where she's going. And to me, that seems incredible. I could never imagine doing that. But then I have to remind myself, I could never imagine composing a piece of music that's played by an orchestra, right? There are people's brains that are entirely different from mine, and some people can hold things in their mind's eye that I would have no hope of ever holding, right? So yeah, I'm going to just go out and say definitively, you do have to have an outline. When an outline is defined as the thing that lets you write and get what you want. And the reason I'm adding that last part about get what you want is because there are times when we can write and write and write and write and write, and we're never getting any closer to either a goal we had intended, or we don't get any closer to knowing what that goal is. So your outline is whatever you have that allows you to write and to get where you want to go. Now you may say, where I want to go is something I'm totally cool with determining in motion. That's cool, right? Your outline is still helping you get where you want to go, but you're allowing for the fact that getting to where you want to go is something you're going to decide. I'm going to see what happens, and then I'll go forward. That's like being the kind of person who says, well, I'll figure out on Wednesday when I want to eat for dinner on Wednesday. I'm not going to do all my shopping on Saturday. I want to know, what do I feel like eating on Wednesday? That's the thing I'll have. I will say this. If you want to write a really well-crafted book, it does take planning. You have to put forethought into what you'll build at the beginning that will, come to fruition at the end, and how relationships will play out. We all have wonderful moments of spontaneous brilliance. But planning means you're not relying on, that brilliance coming to save you. So I think there is definitely a greater value in doing more planning than less planning, because storycraft is craft. And if you wanted to build a car and you didn't want to have any blueprints, you would have to hold a lot in mind. And I think there are definitely people among us who are geniuses, and they can hold a whole story or a whole symphony or a whole car design in mind. I definitely am not one of them. I think most of us are not those people. So I think for most of us, it's really planning. All right. So Mike says, I feel like I am the one on the opposite end of that outlining. I personally will have an idea, then start writing. The story will just form from there. Sometimes I have a plan for a character and that plan changes as the story comes to life. Nice. So it sounds like you have an entry point that allows you to begin, and then that entry point may change, which is such a wonderful point. An outline is absolutely something you can modify and change as you go. And remember, the outline is not for its own sake, it's for the sake of you writing. So if it changes in your mind and you know where it's going, you don't necessarily have to go back and change it on paper or whatever it exists outside of your mind. But it sounds like, Mike, you know what allows you to write and to get where you want to go. So I would say having that character in mind is still some kind of outline. For me, an outline is just any plan that allows you to do the thing that you want. Isn't that a clever definition of an outline? Then anything falls into that category. But the importance of that is that when you get that idea, you need to kind of also have that moment of honesty with yourself to say, is this where I want to go? And is this going to be enough to get me where I want to go? Or am I going to look for other things along the way? Because I talk to a lot of writers who have written sometimes tens of thousands of words and don't know where that writing is going. So there is, I think, always a little bit more risk involved when you do less planning. And again, it's a spectrum. It's not binary. It's not you either plan or you don't plan. But I do think there's some risk involved in doing minimal planning. If you're okay with that, if you don't mind letting things take shape and being experimental and then going back and doing a ton of revising to make sure everything matches, then you're just fine. Good at ladder word games where it goes from paper. Oh, yes. No. I'm a terrible speller, Shauna. I'm not good at those games. I am not. I like them, but I'm not good at them. Mike says, before I finally sat down and actually wrote out the story, I literally told myself the story chapter by chapter from beginning to end while driving for hours over the Blue Ridge Mountains one winter. Mike, my brain and your brain, they would be good buddies. This is exactly what I have seen work so many times. And when I have one-on-one sessions with writers, I become the tape recorder and I just say, you tell me your story, and I type it. The advantage being that when somebody goes, well, I'm not sure, I'm able to go, well, the last thing that happened was. But getting a tape recorder and telling your story is definitely one of the strategies I recommend. We tend to naturally tell stories. You know, think about going to see a movie and then you want to relate it to a friend, and your ease of telling it is, that's your story sense. And you know how to shape it into something with a beginning and a middle and an end. So telling your story out loud, yeah, it rocks. And I would just say record it, definitely record it so that you can go back and transcribe it. Ella, who's a super genius, found out that you can record into a device and then play it for Google Drive with the voice typing, and Google Drive then types it for you, which blew my mind. Dana says, my world, the places, the type of people, the history that will affect my characters, this helps me determine part of the outline. Yeah, knowing the core elements involved. I am so close. I'm this close to being done with the conflict course for the All Writers Welcome Academy, which is all about finding a starting point that's interesting to you. And is it a character you're really drawn to write about? You know, like, let's create your conflict map from that character, or is it a setting or a world, or is it a theme? So picking an entry point for your story, that's something you get really enthused about. That's my brain and your brain, we get along well, Dana. Joanne says she's always planning chapters. Nice. You know, a chapter is such a friendly unit. I think that's a wonderful middle ground. For me, sketching, telling my story out loud, and then planning chapter by chapter is really helpful. Here's something I've done in the past that I have loved. I tell my story out loud and I transcribe it. And then I have this long, no section kind of piece of writing. And I go back through and I just hit enter to make space to create chapter divides. And I basically just do it by intuition. I say, where does it feel like there's a new scene starting, or where is there a new mood? Where's there a new emotion? Is there a new character or a different point of view I'm dealing with? And so I go very quickly from the whole story that I tell out loud, which is a super quick process. And then it's all down on paper, but it's a one solid block. And I go through and just kind of by feel, where do I think it should be broken up? And I do that. And then I can just go through each of those sections and start writing if I'm inspired, or do a free write on that topic. And all of a sudden I have a chapter, and it's often a very short chapter, but that's okay because I can always go back and expand it. The big secret to writing is that it's way easier to revise and add on than it is to draft in the first place. So even if you get a short chapter, you're doing yourself a huge favor. Shauna asks, what kind of general questions would you be asking yourself to outline? I would start with what I do start with is in the conflict course is your plot map that only has 3 points. And it's your inciting incident, your climax, and your resolution. And it's basically fractal-like, because you can keep zooming in and you get, all these little mini, like introduction of problem, working on the problem, solution of problem, that create your rising action and your falling action. But the questions I would be asking myself have to do with, what do I want to have happen in the plot? And then what do I need to show about the characters? And so those would be things like well, let's start with just your main character, right? Is this person changing overall or staying the same? And if this person is changing, where do I want to start seeing that change? It's like, oh, by chapter 5, I need to show that she's starting to doubt and, she wants to try something different. So the specific questions, Shauna, will really depend on the genre you're writing in, the type of conflict you're choosing, your character arc, and whether it's somebody who's changing or somebody who's staying the same. But it's basically gathering the elements of your plot and the elements of your emotional through line or your thematic through line, and matching them up and saying, these are the pieces of the puzzle that I need to have happen from start to finish. So now where can I map them? And I recommend keeping those separate, having your emotional arcs and having your plot arcs, and then you can, try them together, try different places. So we got so many cool suggestions, everything from acting out scenes to talking them out as you drive, to letting your brain do something kind of, low level, like play backgammon or listen to music, so that you can focus without over focusing. For some of us, like the harder we try to think about something, the more our thoughts get scared away, and that's where music can be really helpful, or having something on in the background. All right, so try something is the key, and as long as you have as long as you have something that you can write from, you have an outline. And again, I do want to reiterate that it's not one thing or the other, it's a spectrum. You as a writer will probably feel different, the need to outline at a different level on different days or depending on what you're writing. But if you are going to write a really high quality story that resonates with readers, that has characters who make sense and that your readers connect to, you have to craft your story. Not all writers craft before they write. Some people, and it sounds like some people who responded in this chat, write it first and then come back and craft it and organize it. Totally fine, right? That means you're really outlining after you've written. After you've written, you're coming back through and you're going, oh, well, here's what I have in chapter 1, and what I want is I need to set up this, I need to introduce this person. You're still coming back and you're putting a shape to it after the fact. So you're still getting a story that's well crafted and shaped. But somewhere in the process, you do need to have that shaping. Otherwise, unless you are a literal genius, a literal literary genius, your story's just not going to hold up to scrutiny. I mean, you might get something that is the 80,000 words that we're expecting, but the chances of it being an interesting story that people want to come back to is very, very small, because there are few true geniuses among us. So your planning has to come in at some point, and it might come in all at the beginning. There are some people who are like, oh, everything, it's going to be planned all at the beginning. Some of us who go, I'm going to do a little bit of planning, then write, and then some more planning and some more writing. Some people, I just kind of have a sketch, that's enough. Some people, hey, I'm just going to go in and type and see what happens. And for those people, if you're one of those people, what you need to do is then in your revising process, overlay the structure on what you already have. So those are so many different ways of tackling this problem of outlining. And one of them even involves outlining after you've already written. But what they all have in common is it's giving our brains the tools and the strategies to combine the wonderful artistic flow of words just flooding out of us with a plan. We need a plan. And it can come at various times, but we need a plan. All right. Oh, Denise, you can't hear me? Oh, no. All right. And Risa says, I'm a pantser, seat of my pants writer. Problem is I burn out by the 5th chapter, having nowhere to go. What type of method would work for me when outlining? Risa, I think you should take advantage of the fact that you obviously have a lot of excitement and momentum, and probably some really good writing chops. If you can get 5 chapters in without, putting down some kind of outline, I imagine you've got good writing chops. So you might want to stop yourself at 4 chapters. So before you get to the point where you're like, oh, I lost my momentum completely and I feel like I'm burning out, stop maybe 3 or 4 chapters in, read it, and ask yourself, what do I love about this? And what would I like to be different? Then you can use brainstorming. You can make a mind map. You can do, a bullet point list. You can get on a whiteboard and start asking, okay, the elements that I like, where could those possibly go? And just see how you can make them branch out. Because then you get to take advantage of your surge of creativity. But before it peters out, you get to use some of that remaining energy to just imagine where things could go. And maybe it will feel good to you just to get those possibilities. And then you can do another 4 chapters and repeat the process. But I would recommend that. I would recommend starting with the way you're starting. I'm writing. Oh, it's so good. It's really exciting. Pausing before you totally run out of energy. Asking what you like. Brainstorming where those elements that you like could go. And then when you get your next burst of energy, do the next 4 chapters and keep repeating that. So Risa, I'd love to hear back from you if you end up trying that and see if it works for you. All right, you guys, man, I got so long on these. I'm trying to not yammer on so long. So I'm going to wrap up. Biggest message is that you need to craft your story. You do not have to do all of it at the beginning. Some of you might not be doing any of it at the beginning. Somewhere along the way, whether you pause in the middle or whether you do it when you go to revise at the end, you need to plan so that the story you present to us is well thought out, has characters who make sense and are believable, and holds together, has cohesion. But other than that, when you do your planning, how you do your planning is totally up to you. And when you find the outlining process that works for you, and again, might vary from one project to the next, from one day to the next, but when you start tracking what works for you, your writing is going to up level. And that will be the point when you are just, no matter whether you had a good day or a bad day, or, you are happy or sad, or you're having mojo or not mojo, you will still be able to write. And when you can do that, then so many doors open, right? Because that's what professional authors do. People who make a living at writing books are able to write even when they're not necessarily inspired, when they aren't having the greatest day, because they know how to unlock the process that makes their brains happy. Woohoo! It's all about making the brains happy. All right, guys. Yes, Denise, I'm sorry that you didn't have volume, but yes, Sean is absolutely right. This video will go up in the videos tab and eventually also makes it to our website, allwriterswelcome.com. All right, y'all, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I will see you next time. Ta-ta for now.